What you see behind me is a Buddhist shrine. Anyone who's been in contact with Buddhism has probably come across these quite a lot. They're quite important to Buddhists today, and they are the center of ritualistic practice and the focal point of a Buddhist temple, household, or even in a street. What most people don't know is that these shrines actually comes from the Buddha himself. It was the Buddha himself who started this tradition. But they looked quite different back at that time. You see, in the last sermon of the Buddha, the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, the Buddha travels around India and he explains what people will do when he is dead. He knows he's going to die and he knows things will change when he's gone. So he gives some new kinds of advice and he explains how the tradition should remain strong. One of the things he says is that when he's dead, they will take his body and they will cremate it, as was the custom of the time. They cremate his body and they take his ashes and they will enshrine the ashes in a monument. This monument is called a stupa, and you'll probably see those too in a Buddhist monastery. Usually a dome structure with a spire or something like that. Now these stupas are essentially graves, and according to the Buddha there are 4 kinds of people who will have these stupas built for them. Buddhas, Pacceka Buddhas, that is the self-awakened Buddhas who's not going to teach. There is the wheel-turning monarchs, which is a kind of mythological king, and then there are the Arahant disciples of the Buddhas, the enlightened disciples of the Buddhas. So people build these monuments and inside they put the ashes of Buddhist masters and venerable teachers and so on. Now, this was what the Buddha himself said. You build a monument, and the purpose of this monument, he says, is to inspire confidence in the hearts of the followers. This sight, seeing this monument, it makes you recollect the teachings. It makes you recollect the great teacher who founded the Buddhist tradition. And this will encourage wholesome qualities. It will be an inspiration to people on the Buddhist path. That is the purpose of the monuments. So what the Buddha says, if seeing them is not enough, there are other things you can do. You can go up to these monuments and actually you can give some offerings. So it's not like you sacrifice something. You have to think of it more as putting the flowers on someone's grave. He says you can either offer incense or, he says fragrance. So incense or any kind of fragrance. He said you can bow, as we do today. And you can also offer garlands of flowers. What the Buddha is describing is a memorial piece. It's a grave and it's a memorial piece. And this is what the people did. Once the Buddha was dead, they burned his body, they take his ashes and they share it among themselves. And everywhere there's a major Buddhist concentration, they build these stupas. As you see behind me, this is not a monument housing ashes of the Buddha. It's quite different, actually. So the Buddhist shrine has gone through a lengthy process and it transformed the stupas into this kind of thing. Now obviously there's still stupas today, but these kinds of shrines, as you see here, are more common, so more readily available. In the early days of Buddhism, it was not just the ashes. Other things could be relics too. It could be something the Buddha had used, for instance, a seat. If the Buddha would have a designated seat in a monastery, when the Buddhas died, no one would touch that seat, and eventually they would start using it as a memorial piece too. Other things include the tree under which the Buddha reached awakening. So this is the Bodhi tree, and people would take a sapling from that tree, plant it in their monastery or then in their street or area, and it will function similarly to the stupa. It's a relic of the Buddha. It's a way of recollecting and inspiring confidence in the hearts of the Buddhists. Now, this was the state of the Buddhist shrines for around 500 years, but something changed at around year 0 or around year 500 Buddhist era. Greek culture was on the rise, and the Greek cultural sphere reached actually all the way to India in the south, and obviously it reached far up in Europe too. What the Greeks were very famous for, as you probably know, is the amazing statues. They would build beautiful anthropomorphic statues of their gods, of their heroes, of their loved ones. They would use these statues as the centerpieces of their religious practices. In the Gandhara period, and Gandhara is a place in modern day Afghanistan. This area was a center for Buddhism at the time, and this is where Greek culture met Buddhism. After some controversy, Buddhists eventually adapted this statue tradition and they assimilated it into the stupa tradition. So the way you do it is the same, the practices are the same, and the intention is the same. But instead of having an actual relic of the Buddha, you would have a statue of the Buddha. So this is what we have today. And we have to remember with these statues, they are essentially memorial pieces. They are meant in a similar way as a stupa. So when you see a statue, you can know that going there, showing respect, putting down flowers, bowing, this is actually what the Buddha himself said we should do. So, it's not cultural baggage, as some people say. It's not a later addition. Essentially, it is what the Buddha told us to do. Personally, I find it to be quite effective, seeing these, whether it's an actual stupa or if it's a statue. It inspires confidence in the teaching and makes you recollect this amazing spiritual path, this amazing teacher we have. So then we can go and show our respect.